Hi, it's Russ from Pro Tools Expert, and I'm tag teaming with Mike today. I'm doing the first half of this video, and Mike's doing the second half. I'm going to be showing you Final Cut, and Mike is going to be showing you Pro Tools. And the reason we're doing that is because we want to show you this great piece of software, X2Pro, which converts the audio from Final Cut over into Pro Tools so that you can mix it in Pro Tools later. It's from Marquis Broadcast. And so I'm going to show you some best practice and how you use this so you can get the best results. Because often when sound guys get stuff, especially from the DSLR generation, and I count myself as one of them, but I am fortunate enough to have spent some time in post-production in video, so I know the kind of challenges that sound guys have from the DSLR community, is that if we can get some of this right before we send it to the Pro Tools guys, then you'll end up with better results and less headaches. So I'm going to show you this in action. So what it does basically is it takes all the audio from the timeline in Final Cut 10 and turns it into a file that Pro Tools can read. So I want to show you some best practice first. Let me show you. I've created this this dummy project basically, and it's an interview with James Ivey. In this episode, we meet James in his studio as he's about to track some drums using hardware and the Apollo 16 audio interface.
I particularly like the 16.
So I've created this for a number of reasons. It's given me the opportunity to create some different bits of audio that would often be in a situation like this when you actually come to mix the sound in real life. So what we have in terms of camera, we have some B-roll here. We have the main interview here, and it's picked up on a microphone here on the camera. Then we have the piece of music bed that I've chosen for this documentary. And I've also got the narration that I've put in as well. So none of this is touched, apart from I've done a bit of dipping here, so that as I narrate, I can hear exactly what the kind of thing is. In this episode, we meet. It also gives a cue to the mix guy, who would probably know anyway that needs to be dipped. Now, depending on what the camera picked up on the audio on the camera or the audio and the different things you do, your audio will have different settings. So, for example, we have B-roll here. James in his studio. The problem is that it's B-roll that's still got sound on it, and actually you can hear the sound there if I turn that right up. As he's about to track some drums. Now I could turn that down and that will go away. But actually it's a mute clip really, so what I really want to do is get rid of the audio altogether, otherwise that clip will end up in Pro Tools. So I'm going to show you that the first piece of best practice is if you have mute clips that have no audio involved, then the first thing you want to do is you want to detach the audio from those clips and delete it altogether. So that's gone now. So those will now not present to Mike here. There's two more here as well of B-rolls. I'm just going to detach the audio from those as well and delete those. You can see that already they're showing as basically for me mute. That's slightly tidied up my timeline as well. Now for those that know Final Cut well enough, that the other thing is as well is with audio you can do one of two things. You can either collapse the audio video and expand it. So there it is. And I've collapsed that for a reason. I've expanded the audio video so I can pull it out a bit, so that James's audio runs under that B-roll as well, and it also then comes to here. But the trouble is, when I did a cut here, I've run sync out of sync, so I've now detached that piece of audio completely by using the detach audio command, and I've actually had to move that a few frames. Now Mike, when he gets it, might move it again for lip sync, so if the sync's out, it means that they can work with that sync. What I will say though is you don't need to detach audio for it to go out as part of the Pro Tools project later on. But the second thing you want to do as well is to make sure they get as clean a session as possible, is to make sure that these have one of two things set. First, the narration here, if you look at it, it's a mono audio file, but the camera sound is a camera with stereo audio in it. So if we go into the audio here, and we go right down to the bottom here, and we show that here in channel configuration, you can see it's currently showing as a dual mono. And what I've done as well is I've ticked off that's virtually pointless sound there. I just want this mono track here. So I've turned that off altogether. So you might have to turn that to dual mono, not stereo. So I've now got one mono track for that. This as well, I want to check this piece of camera audio here, but that's not camera anymore because it's detached here. Come to the bottom, and as you can see, it's in stereo at the moment. So I'm going to go to dual mono there, and I'm going to kill the second track that now. So what that means is that all of the bits that are in mono are now going to appear as just a single track in Pro Tools. If you don't tick that box and make them into a mono track, when it gets to Pro Tools, they'll get the sound you want them to hear and the crap sound as well. So that's the next thing I've done. And then I've also left this intact as a stereo track, Pro Tools will see that as two files, not a combined files in true Pro Tools tradition when it ends up going in, and so that can be converted as well. So the next thing to help the sound guy as well is you want to make sure that all these have roles. The way to think about this as a Pro Tools user or for Pro Tools users is the names these audio clips have are the names of the clips on the timeline. However, the roles will be the names the tracks are given when they're imported, which is helpful again for the person doing sound. So I'm going through and I can come here into info and you'll see here there's a roles option and I've got dialogue, music, effects and camera sound. So I'm going to call that dialogue, or I could call it camera sound. For now I'm calling it camera sound, so Mike knows it's camera sound. I'll check on this one as well that the role is the same. Come into info and it's camera sound as well. So that's good for you to do as best practice, so you can just check all of those as you go through. Now the next thing as well is I'm going to narration, and I'll make sure the role on that is narration. There it is, it's narration. Now, if you haven't got a role, when you first get this open, there are just some sets, dialogue, music, and effects. So you can go to edit roles and add them. So I've added narration, I've added camera sound as well. And then here as well, I've just made sure that this one's called music. So that's kind of best practice before you even get it out. So let's talk about actually getting out now. The first thing we want to do in our project is we want to go to File, Export XML, and we go Save. Then we open X2Pro Audio Convert. First we need to find the source file. We go Browse. There it is. It's gone directly to the folder it should be in. Then where we want it to go to, and when we finish with it, so I'm going to put it back in the folder where the XML file as well is. And then we have a few questions. So the first thing to do is to check the roles are all ticked. Camera, sound, music, and narration. They're all there, which we've got. Now, if we'd had the other ones used, then they would appear as well, and we can untick and tick them. So we've got all those roles. So remember, those are track names, basically, when they appear in. Trim embed audio I'd keep turned off, and reference files in place I'd turn off as well. But the important thing to do then is to go into your preferences, and there's a few things you can do. And mainly, it's things like you can discard the transitions. This is all pretty self-explanatory when you open it, but the things I want to show you in particular is trim handles. Keep those in. Mike has requested from me 6 seconds of trim, and that means he can pull, when he gets this audio into Pro Tools, he'll be able to pull it both ways, up to 6 seconds in both directions. And then roles, and what I tend to do is merge the sub-roles into a parent role. So if there are any sub-roles, they would become music and A1 and A2 will all be merged together. So I do that, or you can keep them as sub-roles separately. If you're not careful, though, if you do that, sometimes they end up at the Pro Tools end with a splatter of stuff all over the timeline, sometimes just pointless stuff. Now, the other important thing you've got to check as well is in media locations, you've got to give X2Pro access to where the data is sitting. So all the components of the data in here, if you don't give them access, this is sitting in my video archive. So I've made sure that video archive is added just by clicking there. If it's not, it can't get access to it, and it won't generate the file that Mike needs. And we just hit start to convert it. Off it goes. Just creating an AAF. Now, depending on the length of your session and the length of your edit, of course, that would take longer or shorter. That's all done. It will give you a report on things like the pan adjustments and stuff have been ignored and that kind of thing, but that's pretty standard data. It's nothing to be concerned about. The final thing, of course, you need to do then is come into your export for your settings, and I would send Mike over a piece of video for him that he can use as his reference video for check for sync and stuff like that. And that, of course, that will be determined on what your sound editor wants, what format it wants in. So when you've completed that whole operation, you'll end up with the export AAF, or whatever you've called it. I've got the export movie, which is the reference movie, the QuickTime movie for Mike. And I've also got my XML in there if I want to leave it in there as well. And then I'll zip that up and then I'll send it over to Mike. So over to Mike.
Thanks, Russ. And here we are in Pro Tools. And you can see here the folder that Russ exported everything to. Got the same elements, the AAF, the original XML file from Final Cut X, and the exported movie that I'll also need. Now, I could go into Open Session or just double click on this and it would open up the AAF in Pro Tools. But of course it would have the track layout as it left Russ. What I prefer to do is to import the AAF into my session. So here I have a template session that I use for documentaries. So if we just take a look at the mix window, you can see I have a couple of tracks for sync sound, a couple of effects tracks, a couple of music tracks, a commentary track or voiceover, narration, whatever you want to call it. Then a main mix sub, an M&E sub, a track which will bring my M&E content into the main mix, and then a record track for the main mix and a record track for the M&E, the music and effects. So this would be effectively the basic international sound. So what I can do now is go into File, Import Session Data, and here we are in the folder that Russ created, now sat on my desktop, and I can open the AAF, and here we have the tracks as it left Russ's system. So we've got a camera sound track, we have a couple of mono music tracks, and we have a narration or voiceover or commentary track. Now, I could set these to go on my appropriate track, so I could actually put the camera sound straight onto the sync track. I could put the music straight onto music tracks. However, I prefer not to do this. What I prefer to do is to actually create new tracks which are going to appear down the bottom of my session. So finally, I just check these settings here. I do want to import the clip gain. So if Russ has used any clip gain in Final Cut, that'll come across. If he's used any volume automation in Final Cut, that'll come across. But I don't tend to enable the pan, odd, even tracks. And this is a classic case in point where actually the even track would need to be panned left and Pro Tools would pan it right, and the odd track would be the other way up. And also, not all video editors will lay the audio out as cleanly as this, so it's just easier if I don't use this pan, odd, even tracks. I want to import all the data, put it on my playlist, so there we go, ready to go. I can now import that into the session, and if we scroll down here, you can see at the bottom of the session, in comes all the media. So now I've got the media from Russ's session. What I like to do now is to basically move this content up onto my tracks. Now what I could do is just hold down the control key and drag up. But I prefer not to do that. What I prefer to do is actually to hold down the control and the alt key and drag up. So we'll pick up both these camera sound tracks because Russ has labeled them clearly. I know these are camera sync sound. So I can hold down the control and the alt keys, drag those up and drop it onto one of my sync sound tracks. But of course, because I use control and alt, the originals are still left here. In case I get any problems, in case something moves, I've got my original reference tracks down the bottom here. Then I can do the same thing for the narration track. So hold down the control and alt, drag that up, put that on my commentary track, and then finally take the two music tracks and hold down Control and Alt and drag those up and put those on one of my music tracks. So now, because I actually know that there's only going to be one sync sound track, I'm going to delete that track. I'm going to keep a couple of stereo effects tracks for the moment. I'm going to leave the second music track, so that's just simplified things. Now what I want to do now is to take these original tracks, highlight them all, then right click and hide and make inactive. So they're still in my session, they're still available, but they're hidden and made inactive, so they won't play any audio because I brought all the audio up onto my other tracks. But if I do need to go back and refer to them, I can. Now the other thing I need to do is to import the video. So we can go into Import, select Video, and here we have the movie that Russ created, so I can open that, bring that into the timeline. Now I'm going to get that to start on the session start. I'm going to create a new track, and I'm also going to import the audio from file, because what that gives me is a guide track of how it sounded and how it was mixed in the video editor. So click OK. And now here's our video window. It's asking me where do I want to put the audio files from that. So it's offered me the audio files of the session. So we can click that. There's the video. I'll put it up at the top. That's where I tend to prefer to have the video. We'll put this down the bottom here for the moment. We'll just make it a little smaller, just so it doesn't take up so much screen real estate, and we'll just drop it down there. So now we can see the export audio. So what we'll do is we'll put that up next to the video. I could mute it, but in fact what I'm going to do is to again hide and make that inactive. Again, I've still got it here if I need to refer back to it, but it just keeps my timeline as clear and simple as possible. So now I've got all my components. We've got the voiceover narration here, we've got the music, and in fact if we open up the automation, again we can see that the automation that Russ created has come across from Final Cut into Pro Tools. So now we can take a quick listen and see what we've got to play with.
In this episode, we meet James in his studio as he's about to track some drums, using hardware and the Apollo 16 audio interface.
I particularly like the 16 because you're not tied in to any particular preamps. As we scroll down the rack...
So there we go. Now, of course, I can now start to tidy up. So I would put some nice fades on the front end of that and the end. And of course, because Russ gave me handles, I can pull this out here. So we can take a listen to...
So why is it? Tell us why this is appealing to you versus the studded Apollo.
Okay, I particularly like the 16.
So again, I can just look at that.
Okay,
and purist in me wants a breath at the beginning of that.
Apollo.
Okay.
And in fact, there's a breath in there, so we can zoom right in. And what I can do is to take that breath and put that across. So I've now got a breath. Can't pull it out too much because we've got a little bit of so we can just fade that in.
I particularly like the...
And that's now like a human being who breathes before he starts to speak.
I particularly like the 16 because you're not tied in to any particular preamps. As we scroll down the rack later on, you'll see the rig.
So there we go. We've now got that bit sorted out. Now we've got a gap here. So again, if I just pull that out and have a listen.
Certain vocals, certain different instrument sounds, things like that. But we've chosen to go...
I think there's a little bit of a sync issue here, which Russ was a little bit concerned about. So what I'm going to do here is you can see that this part and this part here are very similar. So what I'm first going to try is just dragging that across. Go back a bit and just look at the sync.
Preamps. As we scroll down the rack later on, you'll see the rig.
So that's that.
Instrument sounds, things like that. But we've chosen to go with...
That's much better. So now we've got that in sync.
Music, certain vocals, certain...
So we can probably just tweak that.
Vocals, certain...
Okay, let's maybe move the crossfade across to here perhaps.
Files of music, certain vocals, certain different instrument
There we go.
sounds,
That's now
like that.
and smooth. So that's got our voiceover sounding better. And of course I could continue now working on this mix, finessing it until I'm happy. So I hope that's given you an insight in how we can use X2Pro to export the audio out of Final Cut X into a format that we can open in Pro Tools, still do the edits, we can still access content, so we can still pull material out because the handles, all the mix information has come across. The clip gains that Russ set have also come across. You can see there's 5 dBs of clip gain in here. And so we can now go through, finesse that mix, but I've still got access to some of the extra content. I could go in and start laying in some ambience tracks through the B-roll to reflect what's going on in shot. So perhaps just some room tone or something. And of course I could also sort out that
hardware and the Apollo 16
pop by using the RX5 Advanced Deplosive module. And once I'm happy, I can then bounce the files out, or in my case, record to tracks, and then send Russ back a pair of stereo tracks, one for the main mix, one for the M&E. Job done. Thanks for watching, and see you again soon.